Hi, welcome to Science Literacy. I'm your host Andy Upton, and I today am going to be talking about vaccines. Bum, bum, bum. Cue scary music here. Yes, vaccines, that incredibly controversial, not controversial subject that pervades our medical community. This is not going to be the last time I talk about vaccines. The flu season is coming upon us. The coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2, COVID-19, the disease caused by SARS-CoV-2, does not have a vaccine yet. And there's just so much misinformation, so many misconceptions, so many myths that need to be cleared up. So clearly, I'm not going to be able to do this in one single episode. But I am doing this episode on vaccines again because we do not have a vaccine yet for the current pandemic. Um, and I have already seen people on social media making comments about how they are not going to get the vaccine. They have concerns. They have trust issues. They don't think that it's right. All sorts of crazy nonsense. The thing doesn't exist yet, and they're already declaring they're not going to get this vaccine. Some people have even stated that they are pro-vaccine, say for MMR, for pertussis, flu, things like that, but they are not going to get the coronavirus vaccine because they don't believe that this is actually a thing. Not the vaccine, but the virus itself. It's mind boggling, honestly. So, what is a vaccine? Where does it come from? And just what are some of these more common misconceptions? Again, this is not the first, or sorry, the last time I'm going to be talking about this, but we've got to pull the band-aid off at some point and get going with it. So vaccines have their origin in England back in the late 1700s with a man named Edward Jenner. Edward Jenner was fighting the plague of the continent and basically the world at that time, smallpox. He was concerned with all the numbers of people suffering from smallpox. Smallpox was essentially a death sentence. Prior to Edward Jenner and what we're about to get into, people had come up with all sorts of ways to fight it. And then probably the most effective way at the time was something called variolation, where they took the contents of a pustule. Smallpox would cause the skin to raise up in these little bumps all over the body. And eventually these bumps would burst with pus or whatever substance was in them. Well, the variolation idea was to cut open one of these bumps, these pustules before they ruptured and take the contents and introduce it into the body of a healthy person. The idea was that you inoculate or you basically purposely infect them with a milder form of the virus. They had no idea what a virus was. They had no idea what any of this was, to be honest with you. They just thought we're going to get infected anyway. Maybe if we give ourselves a milder form of the disease, that we'll survive. And once we survive, they knew that if you survived it, you never got it again. So they tried to get that immunity built up, or sorry, not built up. I hate saying that. Build up your immunity. They try to get their immunity to the smallpox by getting smallpox. So it worked somewhat. There was a decrease in deaths from smallpox by using the variolation method. Uh, so you did increase your chances of living, but it wasn't a significant increase as far as your chances of surviving. You did increase your chances, but considering that the smallpox disease epidemic, pandemic, whatever you want to call it, would eliminate, or you had about an 80% chance of dying from smallpox, decreasing that chance of dying and increasing your chance of survival by even a few percentage points is a major victory. Prior to Jenner and prior to the whole variolation idea, smallpox wiped out the population of North and South America. In the early days of exploration, the beginnings of the 1500s, when the Spanish and the Portuguese and the English and the French and the Dutch and all the European nations came over to the New World, They wrote a lot about how they encountered, as they explored the inner parts of the continents, essentially empty villages, ghost towns. And they just assumed that that meant that there was just nobody living here, that the population of the continents, North and South America, was practically empty, that it was very low. But that's not true. Now, current historical research is showing that quite possibly the populations of North and South America rivaled, if not surpassed, that of Europe. And the reason that they encountered almost nobody or no resistance as they made their way across our continents was because of smallpox. And unintentionally, they introduced a disease that did not exist on our continents, and it just ravaged the populations, killing up to some estimates of 95% of the populations of the American continents. So smallpox was something that people didn't take lightly. So variolation was helping, but Edward Jenner wanted something better. And in his practice, he was a doctor, and in his practice, he came across some people who seemed to never get smallpox. And they were milkmaids, women who were employed to milk cows. And he wondered why this is. They did get sick, but it was of a different disease. It was cowpox, which is a zoonotic disease coming from, you guessed it, cows. There's monkeypox and chickenpox and horsepox, pigpox, I think, all sorts of different poxes from animals. Smallpox is just a relative of these other diseases. So we noticed that the milkmaids with their infection of cowpox, they would get sick, but their sickness was not as severe. They would get a mild fever. They would get a few of the bumps that are characteristic of the pox family of disease, but then they would recover within a few days and they would be just fine, but they never got smallpox. So Jenner was wondering, well, what if smallpox would can be fought off by a body who had cowpox? So what if we infected somebody with cowpox? Would that give them an immunity to smallpox? So he got an 8-year-old boy. Where this boy came from, I have no idea. Was he an orphan? Did his parents approve of this? Uh, did they have a choice? I don't know. If you're interested, please look that up. I would love to find out, but there are so many things that right now that I am reading about and looking into that I just don't have the time. Eventually, though, I do want to find out because it is quite a fascinating story. Anyway, he got this 8-year-old boy, and in the most unethical experiment probably of all time, well, not all time, but of that time, he introduced cowpox to this boy, which means he deliberately infected a boy, 8 years old, with cowpox, and then he let him recover because cowpox was not a deadly disease. He was pretty sure that that would work, that he would be fine. He got lucky because the boy did survive. Then he deliberately infected him with smallpox. I mean, there was plenty of places to get smallpox. Again, people were dying from smallpox all the time. So it wasn't something that you had to wait, for another year or he had to keep it with him or something like. You could just go find somebody who had smallpox, get the virus from them, and introduce it into this boy through variolation, cutting open a little hole in the skin or a little cut and introducing the material from the pustule, again variolation, into the child's body. The child then suffered from a milder case of smallpox, but survived. From this one experiment, Jenner concluded, hey, this works. We're going to keep doing this. And so he went around infecting people with cowpox, and it prevented them from getting smallpox. So smallpox became one of those things that essentially went from you need to worry about smallpox, or essentially you were born and you lived your life in fear of getting smallpox because that was something that was almost guaranteed to happen. Once you had it, and if you survived, hey, fantastic, good for you. Otherwise, well, another one goes down. But after this vaccine, which is named, by the way, for the Latin word for cow, vacca, thanks to the cowpox experiment. After this vaccine, smallpox became a thing almost of the past, or at least of only for poor countries. We've had smallpox outbreaks, not necessarily here in America recently, but um, up into the 1900s, there were smallpox outbreaks in various parts of the world until again vaccines made their way around the world and were through, say, Doctors Without Borders, the Red Cross, the United Nations, World Health Organization, all sorts of other groups, international groups, introduced these vaccines to poor countries or places that had never even heard of these things, much less had the ability to get them. And then smallpox disappeared. Smallpox is not a thing anymore. You don't worry about smallpox. That's not something that you worry about. You worry about the flu. You worry about colds. You worry about, right now, obviously, SARS-CoV-2. You worry about these things. You do not worry about smallpox because it's not a thing anymore, thanks to vaccines. Now, early on, vaccines came in many different types and through mostly variolation until the hypodermic needle was invented, and we were able to inject the material directly into the body. Um, then there were oral vaccines where you could take a pill or get a squirt of something into the mouth or a little drink of something, and that would be the virus or the bacterium. Because prior to the advent of antibiotics, bacterial infections were also kind of cured with vaccines. Vaccines were created for all sorts of different things because, let's face it, there's a lot of stuff out there that does really bad things to our bodies. Um, Again, smallpox is one of them. Then you have things like polio, which was a childhood scourge of the early 1900s, early to mid 1900s, sorry, that infected a large number of children until Jonas Salk created his vaccine. Now, Jonas Salk's vaccine was not the like miracle vaccine, if you will, the most effective vaccine. Other people invented a vaccine that was far more effective than his, and that's the one that basically eradicated polio. By the way, just yesterday, I think it was, there was a article. This is the 24th, 25th of August. So within the last couple of days, there was an announcement making its rounds in the news that polio in Africa is gone. So we've wiped it out, you know, on another continent, which is great because Africa's kind of the last little stronghold for some of these diseases because of its remoteness of the tribal um, system that they have in a lot of the, I say Africa as a single unit, African countries. Sorry, Africa's a continent, a very big continent with lots of different countries, and each of these countries have different tribal leaderships as well as different governmental leaderships that make it very difficult for outsiders or even doctors to get in and take care of these types of things. But polio is gone in Africa. 2020 has some good news. Shocking, I know. But polio. So FDR, one of the best presidents that, arguably, he served 4 terms, so, or he was elected to 4 terms, so clearly people liked him. Um, he had polio, or he contracted polio, but not as a child, but as an adult, which was very bizarre even at that time. It's contaminated water that gives you polio. Polio, the virus, or is it a bacterium? Either way, the contaminant itself, the organism itself, is still out there. It's still out there, but the only way to get it is by ingesting dirty water. So if you drink clean water, you don't get polio. Also, if you have the vaccine, you don't get polio. So schools were mandated to give out polio vaccines in the 1950s, I believe, because there was so much danger in catching polio. So, I mean, swimming pools didn't really have the chlorine that we do today, that would kill the polio in the water. It's a bacterium, I believe. And ponds and lakes and places where people would swim and possibly accidentally ingest the water, possibly ingesting polio and facing, if not death, then deformation of the legs. The iron lungs and the braces for the legs to help people walk. That's what FDR had to deal with. So polio's gone. You don't worry about polio thanks to vaccines. We don't worry about, well, I would love to say we don't worry about measles thanks to vaccines, but that's where things have taken a turn. In 1998, a doctor by the name of Andrew Wakefield in England had created his own MMR vaccine. Now, there's a vaccine that's already made. MMR stands for measles, mumps, and rubella. Rubella, often in errantly called German measles. It's not the German measles; it's different than measles. But mumps, measles, and rubella. Um, Measles is very, very contagious. Probably the most contagious disease out there. It lasts for hours in a on surfaces. So if somebody who has measles is in a room and then leaves that room, and then somebody who is not vaccinated comes into that room, hours later they can still catch the measles. It's a very hardy little virus, and it is incredibly infectious. Yes, you more than likely will survive, especially if you have a competent immune system, but you will suffer incredibly high fevers to the point where it can cause deafness. The heat of the fever can actually interfere with the brain and cause and like kind of cook the brain, if you will, cook in air quotes there. So can cause delusions, hallucinations, can lead to permanent deafness, permanent blindness, um, permanent brain damage. I mean, the list goes on, but you may survive. You more than likely will survive, but that's just not the point. This thing is preventable. We don't need to have the measles anymore. We have a vaccine. So, for those people that want to say, well, there's rubella. I'm bringing up rubella here because it is a different kind of thing from measles. Rubella doesn't really affect adults necessarily. Rubella is the most dangerous in to unborn children, to fetuses. So if a mother has rubella while she's pregnant, that child she's carrying more than likely will either have birth defects or be stillborn. Um, so rubella was one of those things where people said, well, initially they were only vaccinating girls of childbearing age, and then it was determined, well, boys can catch it, guys can catch it, males, whatever, can catch it. Then they can pass it on to the female, the mothers. So let's just inoculate everybody. Let's just vaccinate everybody. So that's when it kind of got packaged in with mumps and measles. So anyway, you have the MMR vaccine, and Andrew Wakefield had created his own MMR vaccine. So he wanted to discredit the current MMR vaccine in order to then sell his version of the MMR vaccine. So he did an incredibly faulty study. I think it only had a handful of participants, so bad sample size. He ignored evidence that suggested that there was nothing wrong with the vaccine, and it was just the worst study possible. And he published his results in the medical journal Lancet. And the Lancet owns up to this. They admit they made a mistake by publishing his paper. But nonetheless, he published it. And as faulty as it was, somehow it made it past all the peer review and everything like that and got published in the Lancet, which is one of the most revered medical journals in the world. So the Lancet had a study in 1998 by Dr. Andrew Wakefield that said there was a link between the MMR vaccine and autism. which means if you got the MMR vaccine, you had a higher chance of getting autism. That's not a thing. That doesn't exist. Doctors jumped on this. They tested it. They ran study after study after study. They're still publishing studies today where they conclude with even bigger, and bigger samples of people that there is no causal link between getting the MMR vaccine and autism. Autism is a genetic um, condition that basically happens early on in the development of the child in the womb. So there's no way that a vaccine given weeks after the child is born could give that child autism. However, it was a correlation. Now, correlation does not mean causation, as it is very fun to say, or we are very want to say, because usually the age at which you receive the MMR vaccine is around the age that autistic tendencies start showing in children. So there are plenty of anecdotal stories, and these are just stories, they're not evidence. Anecdotal evidence is not actual evidence of people saying that took their child, they got the vaccine, and then later that day their child became autistic. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't even prevent measles that fast. Once you get the vaccine, it's not going to immediately pop up and you're immune to measles. There's a window there. There's like a grace period type of thing where you got to be very careful. You can receive the vaccine one day and be exposed to measles the next day and still probably catch the measles because it may be a lesser form of it because you've still got the vaccine in your body, but you can still catch it. So you can't catch autism from a shot. I mean, it's just, again, it's been proven over and over and over again. But Andrew Wakefield made one study, 1998, one single study. It was a faulty, flawed study. It was bad. It was terrible. It was terrible science. It was terrible medicine. It was just bad all the way around. But it set off this massive wave of distrust in vaccines. And it set off this massive wave of celebrities. For whatever reason, we listen to celebrities over scientists and doctors. And it set them off to say, yeah, yeah, my kid has autism because of the vaccine. And people are like, wow, that's true. My kid's got autism. He had the vaccines. Clearly, that's the thing. Look, millions of people around the world get this vaccine, and the vast majority of them do not have autism. Plus, the the mental gymnastics it requires for somebody to go, I would rather my child have the measles, which could potentially kill, than have autism is just aggravating. It's irritating. It's frustrating because they're putting their child's health in danger. There is a vaccine out there that can keep them alive from the measles, and they are willing to sacrifice their children for ideology, and it's just not acceptable. So there have been parents who have been taken to court who have been accused of child neglect when they have had their children get sick. Tetanus, tetanus. You get a tetanus shot every 10 years. At least you're supposed to. Um, I got a tetanus shot when I was 11. I stepped on a rusty nail, and I wasn't supposed to get it for several more years. But because it had passed that threshold when it's kind of like this window after a certain amount of time, you need to get the tetanus shot if you get injured, or if you don't get injured, then you have several years before you can get it. So every 10 years, but I think it's like a 7 year kind of window that after that, if you get injured, then you need to get your tetanus shot. So I stepped on a rusty nail and went straight into my heel. And so I went to the doctor. Well, I was 11. So my mom took me to the doctor and I got tetanus shot. So that was the last time I'd gotten a tetanus shot until my son was born. So my son's born, and I'm 31 at the time. and actually 30, but I'm almost 31. And so 20 years has elapsed before since my last tetanus shot. And I go to the doctor because my wife had gotten it was I initially called it the whooping cough shot because pertussis, which is whooping cough, is part of the cocktail of the vaccine. It's diphtheria, pertussis, and tetanus. DTaP or Tdap or whatever combination of letters you have there. So it's packaged within that. So anyway, I go to the doctor and I'm fine. I'm physically fine. And I go to the doctor and they said, "What are you here for?" I said, "I'd like you whooping cough shot." And they said, "Well, let's get the doctor in," because it was a nurse at the time. "Let's get the doctor in to determine if you need it." So the doctor walks in. He goes, "You're here for a whooping cough shot?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "When was the last time you had a tetanus shot?" And I said, "When I was 11." So he's like, "Yep, you need it." So they gave it to me. I'm fine. A few years ago, there was a little boy in Oregon who got tetanus. Tetanus leads to lockjaw, which basically forces your jaw shut and can actually lead to death because of malnutrition because you can't eat. And the doctors, in order to save this child's life, gave him a tetanus shot, excoriated the parents about not giving this child or getting this child his vaccines, and this kid almost died. He was in the ICU for days. The bill for the whole hospital stay was in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And when they were all said and done, the parents were asked, "Are you going to get the tetanus booster?" They said, "Nope, we're not. We don't believe him. We don't believe in it. We think he'll be okay." The That's the kind of thing that I have a problem with this whole vaccine issue, is that people are putting other individuals at risk, namely their children. So, getting off my soapbox here, vaccines are incredibly important. I guarantee you I'll be talking about vaccines again. We're coming up on flu season, and the flu vaccine is incredibly controversial, and all that. But again, what brought me up to this topic today is, again, SARS-CoV-2. I cannot escape SARS-CoV-2. I've done 10, or this is the 11th episode of science literacy, and three three, so I don't want to offend anybody. Three have been not about, actually two, because there was one when we went to the library and I was talking about zoonotic diseases and viruses and such. Kind of was about SARS-CoV-2. So 2 episodes in total have not been about SARS-CoV-2 or the coronavirus. I can't escape this. And it's not that I want to escape it. There's plenty of science that I'm hoping to do this for a very long time and clear up a lot of science misconceptions. But I would at some point like to move on to other things. However, there's just so much misinformation out there. I am constantly seeing just garbage information. Probably the next episode will be about some more of that garbage information that I come across on social media. And the reason I'm doing this is because I feel it's necessary to understand science. Being a science educator, and again, I'm not an expert. I should have said that at the very beginning. I'm not an expert. Being a science educator, I want people to know science. I want people to understand it because it's one of those things that we live with. It's made our lives better. We live longer. We live healthier. Well, that's debatable. We have medicines that keep us alive. We have the infant mortality rate has plummeted to almost nothing compared to what it was, say, back in the 1700s, when you had smallpox, you had tetanus, you had measles, you had all these other incredibly, some benign but also very deadly diseases that we don't deal with anymore because we have the vaccines that get rid of them, that help the body fight them. It's like going into battle without armor or weapons. There's a rack of weapons and armor sitting right next to the battlefield. And they say, "You're going into battle. You need to have armor and weapons in order to protect yourself." And you say, "No, I'm good. I will learn and get actually experience fighting out there on the battlefield, and that'll make me a better fighter." I don't need the weapons and the armor. I just need experience. That's what these anti-vaxxers are thinking when they say, nope, I want to catch the disease to help my body fight it off, to have it natural immunity. Vaccines give you that immunity. They give you the tools to fight off these infections. They give you the armor and the weapons to fight these battles. Why wouldn't you take that? Vaccines are one of the best things to happen to humankind since, I don't know. They've been around for so long. They've saved so many lives. They've protected so many people. I've been fully vaccinated, and I'll continue to get vaccines. I'll continue to get the flu shot. I'll continue to get whatever things pop up. When I'm of age, I'll get the pneumonia vaccine. When I need to, I'll get the shingles vaccine. I'll get whatever vaccine is available to me whenever it's available to me. Because I know that I'm around because of vaccines. I know that I could have caught, measles at some point in my life. I could have caught tetanus at some point in my life. I know I could have caught whooping cough at some point in my life. It's one of these things that we are here because of these vaccines. So why the distrust? Because the government wants us to get them. They want us to stay alive. Fancy that. All right. Again, I'll continue with vaccines on another episode. Next episode, again, I almost guarantee will be about some of the craziness I've seen dealing with this whole SARS-CoV-2 nonsense. Not the virus itself is not nonsense. The nonsense is the response to it. There's been a new cure offered. Actually, a couple of cures in quotation marks there, by less than reputable individuals, that potentially may cause more harm than good. So we will discuss those. We'll discuss other options out there, other things that are popping up, and try to clear up as much as we can in the amount of time that I've got. So that's it for today's episode of Science Literacy. I'm Andy Upton. I'll see you next time.